Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. The title of today's episode is Divorce and an Epic Comeback with our guest, Nikki Bruno. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Nikki in a second. But as many of you already know, when I send out confirmation emails to people coming to me to get divorced, I always put as the last sentence, divorce is a new beginning. Because I firmly believe that if we take a negative in our lives and use it for its greatest good, we have just done magnificent things for ourselves. We all are going to have challenging situations, but the trick is to turn that challenging situation into something positive so that we can grow and learn. Nikki Bruno is the perfect person to interview for this topic. So Nikki is the founder and CEO of The Epic Comeback. See where I'm going? It's a post-divorce coaching and consulting company. She is also a former book editor, a mompreneur, and a published author. Nikki's personal experience of reclaiming her power after a high-conflict divorce inspired her to help create the Epic Comeback. Nikki is a thought leader on high-conflict divorce, verbal and emotional abuse, high-conflict communication, and intuition. We're going to focus on intuition a little bit more later as well. She has been featured on a multitude of fabulous media from NBC Palm Springs, The Tipping Point Show, The Boston Globe, Best Self, Cosmopolitan Magazine, No Girl Can Go Without One, Bustle, Glassdoor, these are all publications, right, Nikki?
Yes, ma'am.
WVOX AM Radio, and the online show, The Golden Mic, Live. Nikki lives in Los Angeles, and she has 2 children. Nikki, thank you for coming.
Judy, I cannot thank you enough for having me. It is an honor to be on this platform with you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you so much for that, and our listeners are going to be thrilled to have you as well. So, Nikki, here are the questions. What were your challenges leading up to the decision to get divorced?
Judy, my main challenge leading up to the decision to get divorced was not wanting one in the first place. I just didn't want it. I really didn't want a divorce. And I think what was most painful for me leading up to it, as well as during and after it, was that the narrative of my life was going to be broken. I think this is so painful for anyone who grows up with a certain story that you tell yourself about your life. And the story that I told myself was, I am going to find a man who's going to shout about me from the rooftops and about our love. We're going to have children, and we're going to be married forever. And I came from a family where my parents stayed together. They have been together for 50 years now. And I had that foundation, and I had that assumption. I kind of had that, dare I say, fairy tale story that I was ready to enact in my own life. And that's what I did. I found an incredible man who shouted from the rooftops about me and about our union. And so getting a divorce meant that I was going to break the very narrative that I had grown up with and then that I had built in my own life. My husband and I had 2 very young children, a girl and a boy, healthy and beautiful and amazing. We were traveling a lot. We had 3 Ivy League degrees between us. And anyone from the outside would have said that we had the perfect kind of unconventionally free and incredible life, which we did. And yet, the other challenge that I had, other than really not wanting to break that narrative, was that there was a lot of conflict going on, both external and internal. So the external conflict was my husband at the time and I were fighting a good bit. There were multiple aspects of our kind of lifestyle at the time. It wasn't even a lifestyle issue. It was that we were having interpersonal conflict, and we were really struggling about in our relationship to keep things romantic and to keep things intimate and to keep us on the up and up. And so there was external conflict that was happening between us in private and was also spilling into happening in front of our young son and then later our young daughter.
And that's what I really wanted to ask you about as well. Because I know in talking to you previous to now, you were saying that there was a lot of conflict and it got to be toxic. And I wondered, how did this impact your children, the unintended consequences?
That is a rough question to answer because I think it's going to bear out in time to some extent. So our children, when I first filed for divorce, our children were 9 months old and 3 years old.
Okay.
And so it's tough to say how the conflict was impacting them because you can't say to a 9-month-old, how is all this conflict impacting you? However, as the divorce continued on and our situation continued on during our separation and the filing and the journey, one of the things...
Hold on, did you live together when you were filing?
We lived together for about 2.5 months after I filed, which was by far the highest conflict and most vulnerable and awful and torturous time.
Yeah. And that is one of the biggest challenges for people while they're filing in California. It doesn't matter Southern or Northern. California is so expensive, but you weren't here. California is so expensive to live in that people stay in the same home, which presents these really tough challenges. But Nikki, you weren't in Los Angeles at that time, were you?
I wasn't. I was in just outside of Boston.
Okay.
While all this was going on. I moved to LA 3 months ago.
Okay, so go ahead. I'm so sorry.
No problem. So I do know that the divorce had to have been confusing for certainly my older son. So there was confusion. I think there also was probably a significant degree of anxiety, wanting to know whose house are we going to now? Where am I going to be for Thanksgiving? So absolutely, it was an unsettling situation. And my children did witness some really inappropriate and high conflict behavior that was going on with my husband and me. And I know there was one particular incident where my son was actually saying something like, you guys have to stop this. It's not okay for you to talk to mommy that way. That's not okay. So my son was aware that there was conflict going on. And another way that it impacted my children was there was some parental alienation going on. My then husband was engaging in actions that caused my son, again, the elder of the two, that caused my son to come to me saying things like, Mommy, Daddy says you're a liar. Is that true? Or, Mommy, Daddy says that you're not making any money. Is that true? And the narrative that had been told to my children was, Mommy left us. And so there was some really destructive messaging going on to my children that was causing them to, I think, question probably my very love for them.
That's what I was just going to comment on, because 2 episodes ago I had a child therapist here, and he was saying that parents have to be very careful how they talk to one another, regardless of divorce, just in general in the house, because of the impressions you're going to give your children that either mommy is bad or daddy is bad. And then obviously when you're living together, even at the beginning of filing, you're trying to sort out your own emotions. You need your private space. You don't have it because you're living together. And things come out because we're human beings.
We are human beings. And I do want to say on this topic of the impact of the divorce on my children, I want to say that my children are doing well. They're doing well in school. They love their schools. They love their father and they love me. They have positive relationships with both of us. And so even though we have gone through some rough times, overall, my kids are all right. And I thank God and the universe for that every single day, because it means I'm doing something right. It means their father's doing something right. And it means that our children are resilient. And so much as I, in the past and a little bit now, get concerned about that, I rest in my children being resilient and healthy.
And that is fabulous to hear. But I want to pursue this for another minute, because in the best situations, parenting is tough. Co-parenting is almost unbelievably beyond, because it takes a million years to sort out the emotions that led into getting the divorce. So you're still processing that, and we have our trigger points, and we never know when they're going to come up. And then we have to be understanding and flexible with the other parent. And so have you, even though you've gotten to a much better place with your ex-husband now, what are some of the challenges that come up for both of you as co-parents?
So before I talk about co-parenting, I also want to put on the table that there are different styles of parenting children after divorce. So what my ex-husband and I do, I would say, began purely as parallel parenting. We were not cooperatively, kind of on a day-to-day level, co-parenting our children. We were not having conversations about how we could maintain consistency between households. We weren't communicating much at all. There was minimal communication, and retrospectively, I believe that that was best for the time, because we were in a high conflict situation where there was a lot of tension. There was even, dare I say, hatred, potentially hatred going on. And so it was best for us to parallel parent. That was the most peaceful way to go. What I would say is that my ex-husband and I have been moving toward the direction of more co-parenting, where we talk a bit more about what's going on in our respective households. So the challenges were very extreme early on. So my ex-husband and I have now been separated for 2.5 years, and our divorce was finalized a year ago. In the earlier days after we separated, and certainly before I actually moved out, one of the biggest challenges for me was dropping my daughter off with my ex-husband, because my daughter, who's the younger of our children, she did not understand, why is mommy dropping me off with daddy and then leaving? And I know that I'm not going to see her for a while. And she had a really hard time separating from me. And that was heartbreaking. That was, dare I say, traumatic, both for her and for me, because for a period of several months, every time I would drop my kids together off with their dad, my daughter would stage a fit and be crying and screaming, and I want my mommy. And that, I can't not mention that as a very specific challenge that I faced and that my daughter faced. And of course, that was very, very difficult for my son as well, because he was witnessing it.
And you can't be alone in that. Seriously, you can't be. This has got to be something that a lot of parents go through, or a lot of children go through. And you have this settlement agreement from the court, and you have to follow it, especially if the other parent wants you to follow it, because it's their co-parenting time, excuse me. What do you do? How helpless do you feel?
I felt helpless, and I also held on to my faith that what was going on was best in the longer term. And that's one of the kind of lessons that I learned, and that I would spread to anyone going through or coming out of a divorce, is that it's important to hold on to the long game. Hold on to the long game. And for me, the long game means that my children have positive, loving relationships with both parents. There's plenty of scientific research to back that up. And so it was heartbreaking and awful and traumatic, and yet I was playing the long game. And I knew that over time, my daughter was going to have a better understanding of what was going on and why. The other challenge I was going to mention is the balance of communication. So as I said, my ex-husband and I had really negative communication and had a really negative and toxic dynamic, in my estimation. And so balancing how much to communicate, how to communicate, and specifically how to kind of pick battles. That's a tough phrase that I don't really like, because I don't like the word battle, because of course that's a high conflict word. But what I'm talking about are little examples like, if I felt like I was the only parent who was paying attention to the emotional health of my son, or if I felt like I was the only parent who was ever buying shoes for the kids, or if I had some kind of beef with my impression of what was going on in my ex-husband's household, it's really important, especially in a high conflict situation, to choose those battles and very likely to let them go and not even engage in them in the first place. And that may change over time, but keeping those nervous systems in a calm place is so important for what is so important for my mental health, for the mental health of my children, and again, for the sake of the long game.
You know, the parallel parenting, first of all, I love that phrase. I've never heard anybody say it. You invented it, didn't you?
No, I did not invent it.
Where did you find it?
Oh, you could Google it and you would find all kinds of information about parallel parenting and how parallel parenting can be a much more appropriate approach in certain co-parenting.
Than trying to come to a compromise on something.
Yes.
Can you just give one example where parallel parenting worked for you because you weren't of the same mind on something for the TV, maybe? TV homework, dinner, something like that?
Absolutely. Those are really good examples. The general idea is that you have two households that have two different sets of norms, cultures, and rules, and that can be okay for children. So I'll give you an analogy and then some examples. So one analogy is, let's say that you have a third grade son. Your third grade son is going to understand that the rules in his classroom are probably going to be different from the rules in his home, are probably going to be different from the rules in, say, when he goes to his extracurricular karate class. So children understand, they develop an understanding, just naturally speaking in their life, that there are going to be different rules and norms in different contexts. So a parallel parenting situation is really good when you have two parents who are supposed to be co-parenting and who are supposed to be cooperating, who really aren't very cooperative with each other. And so it's better to keep things low conflict if you acknowledge that it's okay for the kids to have, let's say, 2 hours of screen time per week in one household and 3 hours of screen time per week in another household, as long as everybody's on the up and up.
That is so freeing. That
Yes.
really, really is, because one of the challenges when I'm writing settlement agreements and we're mediating the logistics of the day, and one parent will say, well, I'm the one that always did the homework, and this is when I want the homework done, and this is when they're going to eat, and this is when they have to go to bed. But you have to give up control of that to a certain extent. I mean, you certainly don't want your child staying up till 2 a.m. and getting up at 7 to go to school, but within that, you just provided a degree of flexibility that allowed you and your husband to do or ex-husband to do the thing that your kids needed you to do the most, which was not argue.
Absolutely. And I will speak for myself. If I had thought that we were going to have an agreement, a separation and divorce agreement that was going to enable my ex-husband to micromanage me and my household and the way I potty trained and the way I disciplined and the way I managed various types of aspects of my domestic life, I would not have signed that agreement. And I think it's fair to say, I will never speak for another person, but I think it's fair to say that my ex-husband would agree with that. He would not have wanted an agreement that enabled me to micromanage him in the way that he runs his household. I respect my ex-husband's right and privilege and desire to run his own household. And I expect that he respect my right and privilege to run my household in a certain way with my children. And that is liberating. That's one of the most liberating things about divorce, is that you are now, as a parent, in a position where you can make a lot of parenting decisions on your own.
And so how do you communicate this to the children, that it's okay that mommy does this thing this way, dinner, homework, bed, and daddy does it this way? How do you communicate to your kids that it's okay? Does it go back to kids know there are different rules in different environments, school, play yard, etc.? Is it the same principle?
I say to them exactly what you just said, Judy, that it's okay. And one of the things that is important to me to teach my children, partly because they came through, as did I and their dad, a high conflict divorce, is it's very important to me that my children know that disagreement is okay. It's okay for different people to have different opinions about things. So and I use this with my kids as siblings too, if one of them says that chocolate ice cream is by far the best flavor of ice cream, and the other says that vanilla is the best flavor of ice cream, I say to them, guys, both of those opinions can exist in the same world, and it's totally fine. And it's so important for them to know that it's okay for daddy to have one opinion and mommy to have another opinion, and to disagree. That doesn't mean the end of the world. It doesn't mean people are fighting. It's okay. And this is a lesson that all children really ought to be learning, is that it's okay for disagreement to exist in a peaceful society.
So too, to piggyback onto this, it just occurred to me that if the evening is run differently in your house versus the evening in dad's house, your kids can actually choose what works better for them as they get older.
Yes.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way. Very interesting.
I also very much encourage independent thinking with my children. And I say to them often, to the point where they roll their eyes, you guys are going to be in charge of your own lives, and your opinion matters. Your opinion counts. And there's no one, not me, not daddy, not your teachers, there's no one who can be in charge of your brain and your preferences. They're yours. They belong to you.
Okay, this is great. This is wonderful. I've learned a couple new things, and I love parallel parenting. I really like that, because it's very difficult when people are getting their agreements written to agree that we can have things slightly differently. And also, you get to develop as a parent your own individual relationship with your child, which sometimes we don't get to do as parents living in the same house. Maybe the dominant parent gets their way more than the submissive parent, and there's no gender roles here. They could be either gender. But when you're into households, you are going to develop your own relationship with your child because you're the only parent there, and you get to do it. That's the cool thing. And now your children, again, get to see two different parenting styles, and they get to choose what they want to do when they get older.
Sure.
Okay, this is excellent. Okay, now, what are some valuable lessons? We're going to go on the truly positive side now, because I think you have a lot to talk about here. What are some of the valuable lessons you learned from marriage and divorce?
So, Judy, the top lesson that I learned from this entire process, being in a relationship, a marriage that I became miserable in and that felt was toxic for me, followed by separation and divorce, followed by post-divorce recovery, followed by where I am now. The number one lesson I've learned is to listen to my intuition. And not only to listen to my intuition, but to act on my intuition, which is much, much harder. Because We can become aware of what our gut is telling us, but do nothing about it for years. And that's kind of what happened to me during my marriage. There were some aspects of our marriage and our dynamic that were not okay with me, or that were kind of orange flags or eventually red flags, that I didn't really listen to. Some of them I did listen to and I acted on, but in a large sense, I needed to get to a place where I gave myself permission to listen to my intuition and then act on it. And that serves me well every single time I do it. And it's really can be difficult because I'm a low conflict person. I don't like conflict. So if my intuition is saying, boy, Nikki, you really need to have this rough conversation with your client, I don't want to have that conversation. And I get kind of infantile about it sometimes. And I say, I don't want to have to fire that client, or I don't want to have to, even if it's something like I'm at a movie theater and someone's being loud with their food or their cell phone or something. Yep. There's just this like thing in me that prevents me from actually speaking up. And I've thrown away that person. I've thrown away that thing that holds me back from diplomatically speaking up. And so I listen to my intuition, and then I make a decision that I'm going to act on it. And then I have the hard conversation, or I take the action that I know I need to take, and it goes well every single time. I learn what I need to learn, or my relationship with someone changes the way that it needs to, or I clear the air for me to have a much more peaceful life after I've taken that action. The second thing that I've learned is that I need to believe and practice the concept that in any relationship, my needs, my opinions, and my desires are equally important to those of the other person. Like I said, I am an agreement and consensus loving person. And so I have this tendency, especially in my romantic relationships, to defer. My needs and my opinions and desires are not less important than those of the person I'm with, and they're not more important than those of the person that I'm with. And so that's a barometer that I use in my relationships, not only romantic ones, but my relationships with my children and my relationships with colleagues, clients, etc. The third thing of 4 that I have learned is that we are much, much, much stronger than we think we are. As people, women, men, anywhere on the gender spectrum, we are much stronger than we think we are. And something that we think we can't get through is something that it's very likely that we can get through, especially with support. And that brings me to number 4, which is I have learned to get support. And not just to get and ask for support, but to think about what I need and what kind of support I need, or that my children need. Now that I'm a single mom, it's very important for me to ask for support when I need it, especially, but also to make sure that it's the right kind of support for me. So one brief example of this is when you're going through a divorce, it can be really helpful to find support from other people who are in the midst of a divorce too. There's nothing like being able to have a conversation with somebody who is empathetic to you because they're going through the same kind of thing. It is so helpful. It's almost like a huge relief. However, if that's the only kind of support that you seek, it could also be a type of support that gives you that inertia or gives you that kind of stuckness. And so I think it's also important to seek support from people who have been there and gotten to the other side. So to be holistic and specific about what kind of support is best going to serve you and your children and your future. And if it's simply the kind of support where you can vent and you can bash your ex or you can get really angry, that's one kind of support that's really important, but it's not the only kind of support.
Just asking for help is so very hard for a lot of people, especially people who have to be strong in their careers, people who own their own businesses, speakers, writers. I mean, you're looked at as a thought leader, and that's a lot of what you did when, I got to know your background more. So just to be able to say, I need help. It's so hard to do. And almost everybody will open up to us when we do ask for help, don't you think?
Yes, 1,000%. I learned that when you ask for help and when you share vulnerably, this is all Brene Brown right here.
Oh, yeah.
When you share vulnerably and you tell people what's going on with you, it can immediately, overnight, deepen your relationship with the person that you're sharing with. People want to be of help. I mean, think about how would you react if someone who you cared about asked you for help? You would want to help, and you would feel that it was a gift that the person asked you for help.
Yes.
And so we give a gift to people in our lives who want to be there for us, who want to be useful to us, who want to have that deeper, more intimate relationship with us. We're giving them a gift. And when I was in my absolute darkest, bleakest days, when I was still living with my then husband after I had filed a divorce, when he received that act of my filing as an act of war, and he was completely activated against me, I went to a Unitarian Universalist church right outside Boston, and I walked in and I said to the first person I saw, who happened to be the chair of the board of the church, he was greeting that day, and I said, "Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm going through a really rough time in my life. I'm going through a divorce, and I have 2 young children, and boy, oh boy, do I need help." And I went and sat during that service, and while I was sitting there, the chair of the board of the church went to a few key people in the congregation who had been through divorce themselves and who would be able to be there with me and just hear me and listen to me. And I had one of those people come up to me at the end of the service while I was sitting there sobbing my eyes out. And the outpouring of love and support that I received as a result of naming what I was going through and asking for help literally held me up during the process of the divorce. There were, I call them pillars. There were maybe 4 pillars who held me and my children up during that process. And those pillars would not have been built. They would not have been activated if I hadn't spoken my truth and asked for help.
I love that. I mean, I just really love that. I'm looked at as a very strong person normally. I'm a marshmallow when you really get to know me. And I remember saying to my sister recently, I just said, I actually really need help. She said, "Oh my God, you've never asked for help, ever." And I said, "You're kidding. I haven't? Really?" "Yes, tell me, what do you need?" And that was it. Tell me, what do you need? So yes, anybody listening, ask for help, because we can't do this alone. Any challenging time in our lives, we can't do this alone. Now for the best conclusion to all of this. We all have our survival mechanisms that get us through our most challenging times. You created your own vehicle for surviving. And I think the phrase you used, from surviving to thriving. What is that vehicle? And please tell us what that is.
The name of that vehicle is the name of my business and the name of my professional and personal mission, which is The Epic Comeback. As a coach and a mentor and a consultant, my mission is to help people to stage an epic comeback in their lives after going through a high conflict divorce, and often from a high conflict individual. And I help people not just to move on, not just to stage kind of a mediocre comeback, but to stage an epic, literary, I'm going to kick booty in my life again, not despite what I just went through, but partly because of what I just went through, because I just learned how strong I am. I just learned that I'm a warrior. I just learned all kinds of lessons. I'm wiser because of what I went through. I'm a better parent because of what I went through. I'm going to be a better future partner because of what I went through. And so in my company and through my coaching programs, I help people to make bold and epic decisions and actions, much more important than the decisions, the actions to move forward into a better life than they and their families have ever had. So some examples of actions that my clients take is they start a new business, which is exactly what I did when I staged my epic comeback. I started this business and I said, you know what? I'm not going to start an executive and leadership coaching program as I have been educating myself to start and as has been my goal to start. I'm going to change gears and I'm going to open a business that's all about extending a hand and helping people who have gone through similar types of pain and situations to what I went through to move ahead in a powerful way. So that is what I've created. And I have completely geeked out on what I call my epic comeback framework, which is an 8-step program, an 8-step process to create an epic comeback. And this process, this framework that I've been geeking out on for a year can be applied to any kind of trauma, any kind of life-shattering situation. But because of what I've gone through and because of how passionate I am about high conflict divorce and its negative impact on adults and children, I'm focusing on post-divorce coaching specifically.
So what kind of things do you have people go through to test themselves to see what their new decisions can be?
So I'll take you through the steps pretty quickly. The first one is the first step of any epic comeback. And I've studied comebacks of lots of different types: athletic comebacks, personal comebacks, professional ones, business comebacks, spiritual comebacks. This is the geeking out part. This is where my background, my education, and my intellectual background come in. And any good comeback starts with a turning point. There's a turning point where you say to yourself, or where you're let's say you're in the locker room and during halftime of a basketball game and you're down by 30 points and your captain or your coach says to you, all right, guys or gals, here's the deal. This has to stop. Our bad defense has to stop, whatever it is. And so any comeback journey starts with a turning point. For me, I literally looked in the mirror and I said to myself, Bruno, this isn't funny anymore. I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I'm going to get my body back. I'm going to lose that 30 pounds. I'm going to start this new business and I am going to stage a comeback. So it starts with that turning point. I then help my clients go through a process that I call reckoning. It's an assessment. It's where you get really, really clear, where you get really honest about your status. Okay, so these are the cards that are stacked against me right now. I just went through a divorce. I'm seeing my children half the amount of time that I used to. My finances are now in the toilet because of what just happened. So it's a process of assessing, what do I have stacked against me? And also the good stuff. What do I have in my corner? What are my superpowers? What have I gained? How can I reframe this and look at my future as being something that I'm equipped for, something that I'm ready for, something that I bring a lot of skills and talents to? So that's the reckoning phase. And that's followed by clearing. And clearing is the step where you get rid of what you don't need. So you've got your sort of status assessment together of what you've got going for and against you, and you decide and actively clear out of your life the stuff you don't need, whether it's relationships, other toxic relationships with people who don't support you, whether it's limited beliefs or assumptions that you've been making in your life that don't serve you and that really aren't actually true, whether it's actual physical clutter. A lot of my clients go through a process where they do the whole condo thing, and meaning Kondo, and they clear all the clutter out of their homes. That's the third step. The fourth step is creating an epic vision. What is my epic comeback going to look like? Where am I? How am I feeling? Who is around me? What are my relationships like? What am I doing in my career? And creating a really, really compelling vision. It's called the epic vision. The next step is to make a plan. How am I going to get there? The next step after that is taking action, starting to take action. The next step...
I'm writing all these down.
Oh, are you?
Yes, I love these steps.
I'm happy to give you a copy of this PDF I'm looking at right now, Judy. My gosh. And then the next step, whenever you take action, you're going to have to troubleshoot. So it's troubleshooting. It's anticipating what's going to get in my way. externally and internally. What are the obstacles going to be, and how am I going to troubleshoot them? And finally, the ultimate step is called the epic launch, where you proclaim yourself in a position where you have staged an epic comeback. And it could be a party. It could be a makeover followed by a party. It could be the launch of your new business. But basically it's that triumphant moment where you're kind of proclaiming yourself in that beautiful epic comeback place.
Okay, so I love every single thing that you said, and all of this packaged together, and tell me if I've got this correct. Everything packaged together allows you to create the human being that you've wanted to create. You just didn't have that trigger to do it. And so this tragedy, and it is a tragedy, even though there's life on the other side of divorce. I mean, it's very tragic, especially if you have children and you have to get through all of that sadness and decisions. Okay, that's fine. But then you realize, like you would realize when you come out of any other tough situation, like maybe a car accident and it has compromised you physically, like the girl who ran the Boston Marathon, lost her legs. She said she's having the best life she's ever had because it forced her into a completely different direction. And one of the things I think we don't allow ourselves to do enough is make the choices that are right for us, even though they might not be right for the other people close to us. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that we tend to make decisions half for ourselves and have to make nice with the other people in our lives, our parents, our spouses, whoever we have to live with, our bosses, the people at work. We stay in jobs that aren't exactly right for us until something tragic happens. I lost my job. The company was purchased. You know what? That could be the best thing that ever happened to you, that you now have to go out and do something that you never thought you had to do. We are not used to making choices that are exactly right for us, are we?
We are not. And I will say, crisis is an opportunity. Crisis is an opportunity. Crisis opens you up. And thank God that it does, because crisis does force you to go through these processes, to go through some reckoning and say, something's got to give here, something's got to change here. And what's unfortunate is that most of us humans, we tend to get to that place. We wait and we wait and we wait, and we stay in a bad job. We stay in a bad marriage. We stay in a bad relationship, even with a best friend. And we wait until it gets so bad that we have no choice but to change. So crisis is an opportunity. But even before the crisis happens, we do have, as humans, as very intelligent creatures, some of the time, we have a chance also to be proactive in making those kinds of decisions that we know are best for us. And the way that I have figured that out, and I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the way that I have figured that out is to listen to my intuition, to listen to my heart and my gut, because the best decisions come from your heart and your gut. The best decisions and actions do not come from your brain.
I agree with that. I really do agree. So because this is about turning divorce around into the most positive thing possible, we couldn't have had a better guest on the show today than you. I really appreciate that you took the time to come here and talk to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. It was my honor.
Now, how do people get in touch with you if they would like to make an epic comeback?
The best way to get in touch with me is to go to my website, which is theepiccomeback.com. I'm also on Instagram at theepiccomeback. And I'm also on Facebook at Catalyst Coaching LLC, which I will soon change to The Epic Comeback.
Catalyst Coaching LLC. So any of you that need help, and don't we all, everybody does, please contact Nikki. This has been an absolute joy getting to know you. The information that you've given all of us is just so extraordinary. And thank you again, Nikki.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining me once again on Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. You can reach me, Judy Weigel, at my email address, Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com. Judy at constructiveuncoupling.com. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next week.